Apparently, the supermarket checkout line is now a full-service courtroom where one extremely confident woman prosecutes cashiers for crimes like insufficient eye contact and scanning too fast. And somehow, this only gets worse. 1. A tightly wound suburban coupon collector in Illinois rolled her overflowing cart into the express lane that clearly said 15 items or fewer. The cashier looked down at the mountain of groceries and politely explained the rule. The woman smiled with intense patience and announced that technically she had only 14 types of items. Apparently, 27 yogurts count as one yogurt concept. The cashier blinked and calmly explained that the sign refers to individual items, not philosophical grocery categories. The woman sighed heavily and began educating the cashier about customer loyalty and how frequent shoppers deserve flexibility. When the cashier repeated the policy, she leaned over the counter and whispered that this type of rigidity is why stores lose serious customers. She then pulled out her phone and started filming the interaction while narrating that she was being publicly shamed for buying food for her family. A supervisor arrived and quietly directed her to a normal lane. She loudly warned that corporate would hear about their anti-family policies. Apparently, arithmetic is now a customer service issue. 2. A well-dressed lifestyle blogger from Arizona approached the checkout with a basket of organic snacks and immediately stopped the cashier mid-scan. She politely requested that the employee slow down because the scanning sound was very aggressive. The cashier paused, slightly confused, and explained that the scanner simply beeps when items are registered. The woman insisted that the rhythm of the beeping felt rushed and made her feel pressured as a customer. The cashier tried scanning slower. The woman shook her head and said the beeps were now uneven, and it created an anxious atmosphere. The line behind her started to grow. The cashier gently offered to continue scanning normally. The woman frowned and said she expected a calmer checkout experience because this store markets itself as a wellness-friendly environment. She suggested the store should consider a quiet checkout option for mindful shoppers. When the manager politely explained that the scanners cannot change tone, she sighed dramatically and said she would be leaving a detailed review about how the store ignores sensory needs, all because the machine beeped like every other grocery scanner on Earth. 3. A meticulous PTA organizer from Ohio reached the checkout and carefully placed every item on the conveyor belt in symmetrical rows. The cashier began scanning as usual. The woman immediately raised her hand like she was stopping traffic and explained that the groceries must remain in the order she arranged them. The cashier paused and politely asked if there was a reason. The woman explained that the order helps her bag items more efficiently at home. Bread must stay with bread. Dairy must stay with dairy. The cashier tried to follow the pattern, but the scanning order naturally shifted. The woman sighed loudly and began rearranging items back onto the belt while the line behind her grew longer. The cashier gently explained that scanning order does not affect bagging because the bagger organizes the groceries afterward. The woman stared as if this concept was offensive. She insisted the system was disrespecting the time she spent organizing her groceries. When the cashier continued scanning, she threatened to contact corporate about employees intentionally disrupting customer preparation systems. The bagger quietly finished packing everything correctly anyway. The groceries survived the trauma of being scanned out of order. 4. A sharply dressed real estate agent from Florida approached the register with a single bottle of expensive olive oil and immediately asked for a discount. The cashier politely said the item was not on sale. The woman nodded knowingly and explained that the bottle had a tiny scratch on the label. She argued that damaged packaging lowers the perceived value of the product. The cashier looked closely at the bottle and gently explained that the product itself was perfectly fine. The woman leaned on the counter and explained that she works in real estate and understands presentation value. She believed the store should reduce the price because she was now buying what she described as a visually compromised item. The cashier offered to get another bottle from the shelf. The woman refused because she had already committed emotionally to this one. Instead, she insisted the store should offer at least 20% off for the aesthetic inconvenience. When the manager calmly repeated that cosmetic label marks are not discount criteria, she warned them she would post photos online showing the store selling damaged goods. The bottle of olive oil had apparently become a legal case. 5. A fitness enthusiast in California placed a few protein bars and almond milk on the belt and watched every scan with intense focus. When the total appeared, she immediately objected. She insisted the price was wrong because she mentally calculated a lower amount while walking through the aisles. The cashier calmly offered to review the receipt. The woman explained that she had estimated each item based on what she believed they should cost. The actual price exceeded her expectation by a few dollars. The cashier politely explained that shelf prices determine the total. The woman shook her head and said the store should honor her expectation because misleading price impressions create distrust. The cashier patiently walked through each item price on the screen. The woman crossed her arms and argued that she shops there weekly and therefore has an intuitive sense of what groceries should cost. When the manager arrived, she suggested the store should match her estimate to maintain customer satisfaction. The manager politely declined. She then warned them she would post a video explaining how the store invalidates customer budgeting. Apparently, grocery math now works by vibes. 6. A self-declared etiquette expert in New Jersey reached the register and immediately corrected the cashier's greeting. The employee had said, "Hi there." The woman calmly explained that proper customer service requires addressing shoppers as "ma'am." The cashier apologized and continued scanning. The woman kept coaching the cashier through the interaction like a finishing school instructor. She corrected the tone of the thank you. She corrected the phrasing of "have a nice day." The cashier stayed polite, but clearly confused. The woman explained she used to work in hospitality training and felt obligated to help businesses maintain higher standards. When the cashier finished the transaction, she said thank you again. The woman frowned and said the delivery sounded rehearsed rather than sincere. The supervisor arrived and politely thanked her for the feedback. She leaned forward and warned that poor greeting etiquette can destroy brand reputation. She said she might write a detailed review outlining every conversational mistake, all because someone said, "Hi there," instead of delivering a royal court introduction. 7. A highly organized soccer mom in Texas unloaded her groceries and then suddenly stopped the cashier before scanning began. She asked the employee to confirm which cashier had been working earlier in the day. The cashier looked confused but answered the question. The woman explained that the morning cashier scanned her items with much more enthusiasm. The current cashier paused and politely said they would do their best. The woman nodded but said enthusiasm is part of the service experience. As the scanning continued, she kept offering performance notes. She commented that the energy felt slightly lower than expected. The cashier continued politely but said nothing. The woman then explained she was considering switching grocery stores because customer interaction quality had declined since morning. The supervisor arrived and calmly asked if something was wrong with the transaction. The woman said the transaction itself was fine, but the emotional tone of the scanning lacked positivity. She warned the manager that modern shoppers notice subtle attitude changes. Apparently, groceries now require a motivational speaker at the register. 8. A health-conscious mother in Colorado approached the checkout with several snack items and immediately asked the cashier to confirm that the barcode scanner does not use radiation. The cashier blinked and politely explained that it uses a harmless light beam. The woman frowned slightly and asked whether the light could alter the nutritional integrity of organic products. The cashier gently reassured her that scanning does not affect food. The woman asked if the store had documentation proving that repeated scanning exposure is safe. The line behind her grew longer while the cashier calmly repeated that the process is standard retail technology. The woman insisted that customers deserve transparency about equipment near their groceries. The manager arrived and explained again that scanners simply read barcodes. The woman nodded slowly, but warned that if her children experienced digestive issues, she would remember this conversation. She suggested the store should publish scanner safety guidelines for concerned parents, all because the machine flashed a tiny red line across a bag of almonds. 9. A sharply dressed office manager in Georgia reached the checkout and noticed the cashier was wearing a name tag that said Alex. She paused and politely asked whether Alex was the employee's real name or a nickname. The cashier said it was their real name. The woman nodded, but explained that she prefers knowing employees' full names when conducting transactions. The cashier said store policy only requires first names on tags. The woman leaned forward and said, "Transparency is important in customer relationships." She believed shoppers should know exactly who was handling their purchases. The cashier remained polite and continued scanning. The woman sighed and said, "Anonymity can lead to accountability problems." The manager arrived and calmly explained the store protects employee privacy by limiting name tags to first names. The woman shook her head and said she would feel more comfortable if staff introduced themselves fully like professionals. She warned that unclear identification could lead to customer mistrust. Apparently, grocery purchases now require a full legal introduction. 10. A neighborhood community volunteer in Washington placed her groceries on the belt and then paused the cashier with a polite request. She asked if the store could reduce the brightness of the checkout lights because they were very harsh. The cashier glanced up and explained the lighting is controlled for the entire store. The woman said the brightness made the checkout feel stressful and suggested dimmer lighting would create a calmer customer environment. The cashier politely apologized but said individual registers cannot adjust the lights. The woman leaned against the counter and explained that lighting design influences purchasing satisfaction. She believed the store should consider softer lighting for checkout zones. When the manager arrived, she repeated her concern and asked if they could at least lower the lights temporarily. The manager explained that lighting levels are standardized for safety and visibility. The woman nodded slowly and said she would mention the issue in a store feedback survey because shoppers deserve a relaxing checkout experience. Apparently, groceries now require mood lighting. 11. A confident personal finance. Blogger in Michigan finished unloading her cart and watched the cashier scan everything before speaking up. She politely explained that she expected a small loyalty discount because she had been shopping at the store for over 5 years. The cashier smiled and said the store offers a digital rewards program customers can sign up for. The woman nodded and explained that she prefers not to join programs that track purchasing habits. She still believed long-term customers should receive recognition automatically. The cashier calmly said the register cannot apply loyalty discounts without the rewards account. The woman sighed and explained that loyalty should be measured by consistent spending, not app participation. The line behind her began to shift impatiently. The cashier offered to help her sign up quickly on her phone. She declined and said she values privacy, but still expects loyalty benefits. The manager arrived and repeated that discounts require program enrollment. The woman warned she might write an article about corporations that demand personal data before appreciating repeat customers. Apparently, loyalty works only when it involves zero participation. 12. A well-traveled vacation planner from Nevada reached the checkout and noticed the cashier placed her eggs into a bag with other groceries. She immediately stopped the bagger and calmly explained that eggs require their own bag because they are delicate. The bagger apologized and offered to move them. The woman continued explaining that during her travels she had seen grocery stores that treat eggs with proper respect. The bagger gently placed the eggs in a separate bag. The woman nodded, but said the issue revealed a lack of training. The cashier apologized again and assured her they always try to bag fragile items carefully. The woman leaned closer and said, "Customer trust depends on attention to small details." When the manager approached, she explained that poor egg handling could cause hidden cracks. The manager thanked her for the feedback. She replied that she hoped the store would improve training standards because shoppers should not have to supervise bagging procedures themselves. The eggs survived their moment of dramatic concern. 13. A tech consultant in Massachusetts approached the checkout and noticed the cashier typing something briefly before scanning the next item. She asked what the cashier had entered into the register. The employee explained they had corrected a quantity mistake from the previous scan. The woman frowned slightly and said she prefers complete transparency when adjustments are made during transactions. The cashier calmly explained the correction simply ensured the correct item count. The woman watched the screen carefully as each item appeared. When another quick adjustment happened, she asked again what had been changed. The cashier politely showed her the screen. The woman nodded but said customers should be notified verbally whenever corrections occur. The line behind her continued to grow. The manager arrived and reassured her that the receipt would clearly show the final charges. She crossed her arms and said silent register changes create uncertainty for shoppers. She warned she might suggest policy changes in a corporate email. Apparently, correcting a typo now requires a full press conference. 14. A carefully dressed grandmother in Tennessee reached the checkout with a basket of baking supplies. When the cashier scanned the sugar, the woman immediately asked if the employee could confirm the sugar was stored correctly in the back room. The cashier blinked and said all products are stored according to food safety guidelines. The woman explained that humidity can affect sugar texture. The cashier politely assured her that inventory is stored in climate-controlled areas. The woman still seemed uneasy. and asked whether the cashier personally knew the storage conditions. The cashier admitted they do not work in the stockroom. The woman sighed and said customers should have confidence in product handling. The manager arrived and calmly confirmed that all dry goods are stored properly. The woman nodded slowly but said the uncertainty had made her uncomfortable during checkout. She suggested the store should publish storage information for baking ingredients so shoppers feel reassured. Apparently, a bag of sugar now requires a warehouse inspection report. 15. A high-energy gym instructor in Oregon placed a few meal prep ingredients on the belt and then paused the cashier with a question about the scanning speed. She said the cashier seemed to be scanning faster than other employees. The cashier smiled and said they simply try to keep lines moving. The woman explained that rapid scanning makes it difficult for customers to mentally track the cost of each item. The cashier offered to slow down slightly. The woman nodded but said she would prefer the cashier announce each price aloud before scanning. The employee politely explained that prices appear on the display screen for customers to view. The woman said not everyone wants to stare at a screen during checkout. The manager arrived and calmly explained the store relies on digital displays for price visibility. The woman sighed and said modern technology has made shopping less personal. She warned that customers should not need to monitor screens to understand their own purchases. Apparently, the register should now narrate the grocery list like a dramatic audiobook. 16. A sharply organized neighborhood committee leader in North Carolina approached the register and placed a reusable shopping bag on the counter. Before scanning began, she politely asked the cashier to confirm that the bagging process would prioritize sustainability. The cashier said they always try to use reusable bags efficiently. The woman explained she prefers groceries arranged in a way that reduces plastic packaging contact. The cashier nodded and continued scanning. As the bagger started placing items into the reusable bag, the woman gently corrected the placement order. She explained that vegetables should be separated from items wrapped in plastic trays. The bagger politely adjusted the items. The woman then said the bag seemed too full and might stretch the fabric. The cashier paused and offered to use a second bag. The woman sighed and said customers should not need to supervise sustainable packing practices. The manager arrived and reassured her they try to accommodate reusable bags whenever possible. She warned she might suggest eco-training improvements to corporate. Apparently, a grocery bag now requires environmental consulting. 17. A confident local food blogger in New York reached the checkout with several specialty sauces and carefully watched the screen as each item scanned. When the total appeared, she frowned slightly and said the checkout experience felt rushed. The cashier looked surprised and asked if something was incorrect. The woman said the process ended too quickly, and she barely had time to review the item prices while they appeared. The cashier explained that customers can review the receipt afterward if needed. The woman shook her head and said checkout should feel like a thoughtful transaction, not a rapid exchange. The cashier politely offered to pause after each scan next time. The woman leaned forward and explained that speed-focused retail environments prioritize efficiency over customer awareness. When the manager arrived, she calmly explained her concern that fast scanning prevents shoppers from processing their purchases in real time. The manager thanked her for the feedback. She said she might write about the experience in her blog. Apparently, grocery checkout now requires a reflective moment of financial mindfulness. 18. A sharply dressed marketing consultant in Atlanta rolled her cart up to the register and carefully arranged her groceries on the belt before pulling out her phone camera. She informed the cashier that she records all transactions for consumer protection purposes. The cashier blinked and politely said, "Filming employees is discouraged, but not forbidden." The woman smiled and said, "Transparency protects everyone involved." As the cashier began scanning items, she narrated loudly into the camera about pricing accuracy and retail accountability. When the cashier accidentally scanned one yogurt twice and immediately corrected it, the woman leaned closer with the phone and announced that mistakes like this are exactly why customers must document purchases. The cashier calmly showed the corrected total. The woman continued filming and warned that if any charge looked suspicious later, she would post the footage online. The supervisor approached and gently asked her to avoid filming employees' faces. She responded that recording public commerce is her right as a consumer advocate. The groceries were scanned correctly. The documentary apparently required it anyway. 19. A determined homeschooling mother in Missouri stepped into the checkout line with a full cart and immediately asked the cashier to confirm that none of the items had been previously returned by other customers. The cashier looked confused and explained that returned food products are not placed back on shelves. The woman said she appreciated the reassurance, but asked how the store could prove that policy was always followed. The cashier calmly explained that food safety procedures prevent resale of returned perishables. The woman crossed her arms and said she was responsible for protecting her children from possible contamination. She insisted the cashier confirm that every item in her cart came directly from unopened store inventory. The line behind her began shifting. The cashier repeated that store policy ensures safe stocking procedures. The manager arrived and gently offered the same explanation. The woman sighed dramatically and said parents deserve stronger guarantees. She warned that if her children became sick, she would remember this conversation during the legal process. Apparently, cereal boxes now require sworn testimony. 20. A confident corporate trainer in Chicago placed several items on the conveyor belt and then paused the cashier with a raised finger. She calmly explained that the cashier had not made eye contact while greeting her. The employee looked slightly startled and apologized, saying they were scanning the previous customer's items at the moment. The woman shook her head and said, "Professional service begins with eye contact acknowledgement." The cashier politely greeted her again and continued scanning. The woman leaned forward and explained she teaches customer engagement seminars and understands service psychology very well. The cashier nodded politely and kept working. The woman then began explaining that poor greeting standards reflect weak corporate leadership. When the manager approached to ask if there was an issue, the woman calmly suggested the store should retrain employees in basic interpersonal respect. She mentioned she might send a detailed report to corporate leadership outlining the failed greeting interaction. The groceries scanned perfectly. Apparently, the tragedy was the missing eye contact ceremony. 21. A frustrated yoga studio owner in California approached the checkout with a basket of organic produce and immediately complained about the pace of the line. She said the store clearly underestimated peak shopping demand. The cashier apologized and explained the store schedules staff according to expected traffic. The woman sighed and said she values her time and expects businesses to respect that. The cashier quietly continued scanning. The woman then began filming the line behind her while narrating that inefficient checkout systems harm the customer experience. The manager arrived and politely explained that additional lanes were opening shortly. The woman pointed her phone toward the employees and warned that she might post a video discussing how large grocery chains failed to respect customer time management. The manager calmly thanked her for the feedback and continued helping customers. The woman ended the recording by announcing that she would consider switching stores if the company did not improve operational efficiency. Apparently, a 5-minute wait now qualifies as investigative journalism. 22. A sharply organized accountant in Minnesota reached the checkout and carefully examined the receipt before paying. She suddenly pointed to a line item and said the price of the pasta sauce had increased by 70 cents compared to the last time she bought it. The cashier calmly confirmed that prices sometimes change between shipments. The woman frowned and said loyal customers should be protected from sudden price increases. The cashier explained that shelf labels reflect current pricing. The woman insisted that since she regularly purchases the item, the store should honor the price she remembers paying last month. The manager arrived and politely explained that the register must follow the current shelf price. The woman shook her head and said sudden increases violate customer trust. She warned that she might report the issue to the State Consumer Protection Office for price consistency concerns. The manager quietly offered to check if the item was accidentally placed in the wrong shelf location. It was not. Apparently, inflation now requires a courtroom. 23. A social media lifestyle reviewer in Texas rolled her cart to the register and casually mentioned that she has a sizable online following. The cashier smiled politely and began scanning items. The woman then explained that small businesses often provide complimentary products to influencers who feature them positively online. The cashier paused and said the store does not offer influencer partnerships at the register. The woman laughed lightly and said she was simply suggesting that goodwill gestures can generate positive publicity. The cashier continued scanning groceries. The woman leaned closer and said that if the store wanted to build community trust, she could easily post a video praising their service. The manager arrived and politely explained that employees cannot discount groceries for promotional reasons. The woman nodded slowly and said she understood, but negative experiences also tend to perform very well online. The groceries were scanned normally, and she paid the full total. Apparently, grocery checkout now doubles as a sponsorship negotiation. 24. A very serious neighborhood HOA president in Arizona placed her groceries on the belt and immediately informed the cashier that she needed the transaction completed quickly because she had a community meeting. The cashier nodded and began scanning efficiently. When the bagger placed a loaf of bread at the bottom of the bag, the woman quickly stopped the process. She explained that bread compression damages texture quality. The bagger apologized and moved the bread. The woman sighed and said poor bagging standards waste customer money. The cashier calmly reassured her that the item was fine. The woman then pulled out her phone and said she was documenting the bagging process because mishandled groceries represent product damage. The manager approached and offered to repack the bag properly. The woman said she appreciated the correction but warned that careless packing could easily lead to reimbursement claims. The bread remained perfectly normal. Apparently, the loaf had narrowly survived structural collapse. 25. A highly organized travel agent in Florida arrived at the checkout with several frozen items and immediately asked how long the store expects frozen products to remain safe after purchase. The cashier explained that customers typically transport them home quickly or use insulated bags. The woman frowned and said, "She lives 20 minutes away." She asked if the store guarantees that the products will remain frozen during her drive. The cashier politely explained that transportation conditions are outside the store's control. The woman said she expected reassurance because she had purchased premium ice cream. The manager arrived and repeated that frozen goods should remain safe if transported reasonably quickly. The woman sighed and said she hoped the store would stand behind the product quality if melting occurred. She suggested she might return the items later if the texture changed during the drive. The manager politely nodded. Apparently, ice cream now requires a climate guarantee contract. 26. A stern corporate HR manager in Pennsylvania stepped up to the register and carefully observed the cashier while items were scanned. Halfway through the process, she interrupted and asked if the employee had completed customer service training recently. The cashier said yes and continued scanning. The woman crossed her arms and said, "Operational." Operational inefficiency frustrates customers. When the manager approached, she calmly introduced herself as someone who evaluates workplace performance professionally. She suggested the store review its checkout workflow to reduce micro delays. The manager thanked her politely. The woman warned that inefficient customer processing damages brand loyalty and said she might contact corporate leadership with suggestions. The groceries were processed in under 2 minutes. Apparently, the register had failed a performance review. 27. A protective mother in Nevada arrived with 2 small children and a cart full of groceries. As the cashier began scanning, the woman asked whether the store had sanitized the conveyor belt recently. The cashier explained that belts are cleaned regularly throughout the day. The woman nodded but said, "Children's health requires stronger assurances." She pointed out that raw meat packages had passed across the belt earlier. The cashier politely explained that packaging prevents contamination. The woman asked if the store could wipe down the belt before her groceries were scanned. The cashier called the supervisor, who quickly cleaned the belt. The woman watched closely and then said she appreciated the effort, but felt the store should sanitize between every customer. The manager explained that continuous cleaning would stop checkout flow entirely. The woman warned that if her children experienced stomach issues, she would investigate food handling procedures. The groceries moved down the freshly cleaned belt anyway. 28. A confident retired lawyer in Maryland placed several items on the conveyor and carefully observed the scanning process. When the cashier finished, she asked for a printed receipt. The cashier handed it to her. The woman then asked for a second copy for her records. The cashier explained the register prints only one receipt automatically. The woman said legal professionals maintain detailed documentation for all transactions. The cashier offered to reprint it from the system. The woman studied the receipt closely and began asking questions about the tax line and rounding differences. The cashier calmly explained the state tax calculation. The woman nodded but said customers deserve clarity about financial charges. The manager arrived and repeated the explanation. The woman warned that unclear receipts could cause legal misunderstandings about retail billing practices. She placed the receipt carefully into her folder like it was evidence in a court case. Apparently, groceries now require legal archiving. 29. A sharply dressed interior decorator in New York reached the checkout with a basket of premium groceries and immediately commented on the color of the reusable store bags. She explained that the shade of green clashed with the packaging of several items. The cashier blinked and said the bags are standardized across all locations. The woman sighed and said presentation matters when carrying groceries through a building lobby. The cashier politely offered a plain paper bag instead. The woman shook her head and said paper wrinkles easily. The manager arrived and listened patiently while she explained that brand aesthetics influence customer perception. The manager apologized but said the store cannot offer alternative bag colors. The woman warned that she might write a review about the lack of visual coordination in the checkout experience. The groceries were packed anyway. Apparently, milk cartons now require color harmony. 30. A confident nutrition coach in Utah placed her groceries on the belt and asked the cashier to confirm the origin of the avocados she had selected. The cashier said the label indicated they came from Mexico. The woman asked whether the store had verified the farming practices. The cashier politely explained that suppliers are vetted through corporate purchasing teams. The woman said she prefers to know the ethical background of her food sources. The manager arrived and repeated the information about supplier certification. The woman nodded but said customers should receive immediate answers about farming transparency. She warned that if the sourcing information was inaccurate, she would consider it misleading retail practice. The manager offered to provide the supplier information online. The woman said she would research it personally and possibly write a public review. The avocados had suddenly become a geopolitical investigation. 31. A determined suburban parent in New Jersey approached the checkout and immediately announced that she was in a hurry because her child was waiting in the car. The cashier began scanning quickly. When another customer asked if they could step ahead with one item, the woman refused loudly and said her time was more urgent. The cashier continued, scanning calmly. The woman then said the store should have a priority lane for parents managing busy schedules. The manager approached and politely explained that the store serves customers in order of arrival. The woman sighed and said, "Businesses that ignore family pressures lose community support." She warned she might write to corporate about the store's failure to support working parents. The groceries were finished, and she paid normally. Apparently, the checkout line had failed a parenting policy test. 32. A very confident online review enthusiast in California approached the register and immediately placed her phone on the counter recording video. She said she likes documenting retail experiences for transparency. The cashier politely asked if she could avoid filming employees directly. The woman replied that public transactions are fair content for consumer education. As the cashier scanned items, she narrated commentary about checkout speed and bagging style. The manager arrived and calmly repeated the request not to film staff faces. The woman smiled and said her viewers appreciate authentic customer experiences. She added that businesses that resist filming often have something to hide. The manager simply continued the transaction. The woman finished recording and said she would decide later whether the experience deserved a positive or negative review. Apparently, groceries now come with a production crew. 33. A serious environmental activist in Oregon stepped into the checkout line with several items wrapped in plastic packaging. She pointed at the packaging and asked why the store still sells products that are not biodegradable. The cashier politely explained that manufacturers control packaging design. The woman said retailers share responsibility for environmental impact. The cashier nodded but continued scanning items. The woman then suggested the store should discount items with excessive plastic as an environmental accountability measure. The manager arrived and calmly explained the store cannot alter pricing for packaging concerns. The woman sighed and said she might organize a community petition encouraging customers to shop elsewhere if sustainability concerns were ignored. The groceries were scanned normally. Apparently, the checkout lane had become an environmental policy summit. 34. A sharply dressed event planner in Virginia placed several party supplies and groceries on the conveyor belt and carefully watched the bagging process. When the bagger used 2 bags instead of 1, she stopped the process immediately. She explained that unnecessary bags increase clutter during event preparation. The bagger apologized and offered to repack the items. The woman sighed and said efficiency matters when customers are planning professional events. The cashier calmly reassured her the items would fit safely in 1 bag. The manager approached and helped reorganize the groceries. The woman said she appreciated the correction, but expected employees to anticipate these needs without supervision. She warned that careless packing decisions could complicate large event logistics. The groceries were neatly packed into one bag. Apparently, the party had narrowly avoided disaster. 35. A sharply dressed corporate compliance officer in Houston stepped up to the checkout with a cart of groceries and immediately questioned the cashier about the store's receipt verification policy. She asked whether customers were legally required to keep their receipt visible while exiting the building. The cashier calmly explained that the store does not require receipt checks unless security flags a concern. The woman nodded slowly and said she had read about stores that detain customers without proper authority. The cashier politely reassured her that the store follows standard retail guidelines. The woman leaned closer and said she wanted written confirmation that she would not be stopped after paying. The manager arrived and calmly repeated the policy. The woman said she expected legal clarity before completing her purchase. She explained that unlawful receipt checks could violate consumer rights. The manager politely said she was free to exit normally after paying. The woman finally completed the transaction but warned she would document the policy conversation for legal reference. Apparently, buying groceries now requires constitutional clarification. 36. A sharply organized luxury lifestyle consultant in Beverly Hills placed her items on the belt and immediately complained about the tone of the self-checkout announcement playing in the background. She said the automated voice sounded impatient and rushed. The cashier politely explained that the announcements are standardized across all locations. The woman said customer environments should feel welcoming rather than robotic. As the cashier continued scanning items, she began recording the speaker system with her phone. She narrated that the store atmosphere created unnecessary psychological pressure for shoppers. The manager arrived and apologized for the inconvenience, but explained the audio system cannot be changed locally. The woman shook her head and said retail environments shape emotional well-being. She warned that if the store refused to adjust its aggressive audio messaging, she would send a formal complaint to corporate and possibly discuss it in her lifestyle podcast. The groceries were scanned without issue. Apparently, the real crisis was the store speaker sounding slightly enthusiastic. 37. A determined PTA fundraising coordinator in Indiana approached the register and noticed the cashier had briefly paused to adjust the receipt printer. She immediately asked if the delay would affect her transaction timing. The cashier calmly explained the printer simply needed paper and the transaction would proceed normally. The woman crossed her arms and said, "Interruptions during checkout create uncertainty for customers. Managing busy schedules." The cashier apologized and continued scanning. The woman began explaining that professional operations require seamless workflow. The manager arrived and politely reassured her the machine was functioning correctly. The woman sighed dramatically and said operational disruptions should be disclosed before checkout begins. She warned that customers deserve predictable service when spending their money. She mentioned she might send a letter to corporate headquarters describing the equipment reliability concerns. The groceries were processed in under a minute. Apparently, a paper roll change now counts as infrastructure failure. 38. A confident neighborhood watch organizer in Phoenix stepped up to the checkout and began asking the cashier about store surveillance cameras. She wanted to know how long footage is stored and whether customers can request access to recordings. The cashier looked confused but said security footage is managed by corporate. The woman explained she believed someone had taken her parking space outside and wanted to verify the timeline. The cashier gently said checkout employees do not control security systems. The woman insisted that as a paying customer, she deserved transparency about camera access. The manager arrived and explained that footage requests must go through corporate security channels. The woman shook her head and said community accountability requires cooperation. She warned that if the store refused to assist, she might contact local authorities about consumer access to surveillance records. The groceries were scanned while she continued discussing security protocols. Apparently, the checkout counter had become a surveillance hearing. 39. A highly confident legal studies student in Boston rolled her cart to the register and carefully observed the cashier scanning items. Halfway through, she interrupted and asked whether the cashier had permission to touch the products she purchased. The cashier suggested that once items are placed on the belt, they technically remain the customer's property until payment is completed. The cashier calmly explained that handling items during checkout is standard procedure. The woman leaned closer and said unauthorized handling could potentially raise liability questions. The manager arrived and politely confirmed that employees must handle items to process purchases. The woman sighed and said she would review the legal framework later and might contact corporate legal counsel for clarification. The groceries were bagged normally. Apparently, the register had accidentally entered law school. 40. A passionate neighborhood activist in Seattle placed her groceries on the conveyor belt and immediately began asking the cashier about the store's community support policies. She wanted to know what percentage of profits were reinvested locally. The cashier politely said corporate manages charitable partnerships. The woman said ethical consumers deserve transparency before completing purchases. The cashier calmly continued scanning. The woman pulled out her phone and began recording the conversation while explaining that community responsibility is important for modern businesses. The manager arrived and offered to provide a corporate website link with donation information. The woman said customers should not need to research corporate responsibility themselves. She warned that if the store could not immediately answer her questions, she might encourage neighbors to reconsider shopping there. The groceries were scanned without issue. Apparently, a carton of milk required a corporate ethics report. 41. A dramatic social media personality in Miami rolled her cart to the checkout and immediately started live streaming to her followers. She loudly announced that she was about to test the store's customer service in real time. The cashier smiled politely and began scanning items. The woman narrated every step while filming the cashier's hands. She asked the employee several questions about pricing accuracy and bagging techniques while the audience watched. The cashier answered calmly. When the manager asked her to avoid filming staff faces, she accused the store of hiding from accountability. She raised her voice so viewers could hear the confrontation clearly. She said businesses that fear transparency usually have something to hide. The manager simply asked her to continue the transaction respectfully. She finished paying but promised her followers she would post a full breakdown of the experience later. Apparently, groceries now come with a live broadcast. 42. A frustrated suburban mother in Dallas arrived at the checkout with a cart full of groceries and immediately complained about the pace of the cashier. She said the scanning speed felt slower than the other lanes. The cashier calmly apologized and continued scanning steadily. The woman grew louder and said customers should not suffer because employees lack urgency. The manager arrived and politely offered to move her to another lane if she preferred. She refused and said the issue was about accountability. She then demanded the cashier's full name so she could report the situation to corporate. The manager explained that employees provide first names only. The woman said she would contact headquarters and request that the employee be formally reviewed for performance issues. The groceries were finished moments later. Apparently, a slightly slower scan had become a disciplinary investigation. 43. A determined wellness blogger in San Diego placed her groceries on the belt and suddenly complained that the cashier had touched her produce without gloves. The cashier explained that gloves are not required for handling packaged produce. The woman insisted that food safety standards demand glove use. The cashier politely said employees wash hands frequently according to store policy. The woman grew more intense and said she had documented the moment on her phone. She warned that improper food handling could create liability if contamination occurred. The manager arrived and calmly explained the store follows approved health guidelines. The woman said she might contact the county health department for clarification about glove policies. She finished paying but continued filming the employees while describing the issue to her audience. Apparently, scanning an apple had triggered a public health investigation. 44. A highly dramatic wedding planner in New York approached the checkout with several decorative items and groceries. When the cashier scanned a box slightly sideways, she immediately gasped and said the product could be damaged. The cashier calmly rotated the box and showed that it was intact. The woman said presentation quality matters because she purchased the item for an event. The manager arrived and offered to replace the item if she preferred. She refused the replacement, but demanded that the cashier handle products with professional care. She began filming the process and announced loudly that careless retail handling ruins expensive events. Other customers watched the scene while she described the situation into her phone. The manager politely asked her to continue the transaction calmly. She warned that she might post the video online as an example of poor service standards. The box remained perfectly fine. Apparently, cardboard now requires ceremonial handling. 45. A furious retired insurance agent in Chicago reached the checkout and suddenly accused the cashier of intentionally scanning items too quickly so customers could not monitor prices. The cashier calmly pointed to the large display screen showing each item and price. The woman said the screen was not enough transparency. She demanded the cashier pause after every scan, so she could verify each charge verbally. The cashier tried to accommodate the request, but the line behind her grew longer. The manager arrived and politely explained that normal scanning speed is required to serve all customers. The woman raised her voice and said rushing customers could be considered deceptive retail practice. She demanded the manager's name and store number so she could file a formal consumer complaint. The groceries were eventually scanned normally. Apparently, the register had been accused of financial conspiracy. 46. A determined neighborhood organizer in Atlanta approached the checkout and immediately claimed she had been treated unfairly in the line because another customer moved slightly ahead of her earlier. The cashier apologized and said they had not noticed the situation. The woman said fairness in public spaces matters deeply. She insisted the store should enforce strict queue order at all times. The manager arrived and explained that customers usually... She pulled out her phone and began filming. The manager politely declined. She pulled out her phone and began filming while saying she was documenting discriminatory treatment toward paying customers. Other shoppers stared while she narrated the situation dramatically. Apparently, standing in line had become a civil rights dispute. 47. A furious lifestyle influencer in Los Angeles reached the checkout and immediately began live streaming again while accusing the store of disrespecting her time. She said she had waited 3 minutes longer than expected in line. The cashier apologized politely. The woman raised her voice and demanded the store compensate her for wasted time. The manager calmly explained that wait times vary during busy hours. She declared that time theft is a real issue for consumers and threatened to file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. She continued filming the employees while telling viewers that corporations exploit customer patience. When the manager declined compensation, she threatened to call the police for what she described as commercial misconduct. The groceries were scanned normally. Apparently, 3 minutes had escalated into a federal case. 48. A confrontational suburban parent in Phoenix arrived at the register and loudly accused the cashier of skipping her greeting. The cashier politely apologized and greeted her again. The woman refused the apology and demanded the cashier repeat the greeting properly. The employee complied calmly. The woman said it sounded insincere and demanded the manager intervene. When the manager arrived, she insisted the employee be removed from the register for disrespecting customers. The manager explained the greeting had simply been missed during a busy moment. The woman began filming and said she would send the video to corporate demanding disciplinary action. Other customers watched the scene while the cashier quietly finished scanning the groceries. Apparently, a missed hello had turned into a termination request. 49. A furious customer rights advocate in Philadelphia approached the checkout and loudly accused the store of deceptive pricing because the total included sales tax. The cashier calmly explained that state law requires tax on certain items. The woman insisted the shelf price should reflect the full total. The manager repeated that tax is applied by law at the register. The woman raised her voice and said charging extra at checkout was misleading business practice. She demanded the manager remove the tax from her purchase. When the manager refused, she threatened to contact the state attorney general's office. She began recording video and loudly described the situation as illegal overcharging. The groceries were still taxed normally. Apparently, the entire state tax code had become a personal insult. 50. A furious business consultant in Denver reached the checkout and accused the store of profiling her because a security employee happened to walk past the lane while she was paying. The cashier calmly said the employee was simply walking through the aisle. The woman insisted the presence of security implied suspicion toward her. The manager arrived and reassured her that no one had accused her of anything. She raised her voice and said, "Customers deserve respect and freedom from suspicion." She demanded written confirmation that she was not under investigation. When the manager explained that such confirmation was unnecessary, she threatened to contact a lawyer for discrimination concerns. The groceries were paid for normally. Apparently, a security guard walking by had triggered a legal drama. 51. A completely outraged shopper in Las Vegas reached the checkout and exploded when the cashier asked if she wanted a printed receipt or digital receipt. She accused the store of trying to eliminate paper records, so customers could not prove purchases later. The cashier calmly explained that many customers prefer digital receipts. The woman refused to continue the transaction and demanded the manager immediately. When the manager arrived, she loudly declared that the question itself was suspicious. She said companies remove paper trails to avoid accountability. The manager politely handed her a printed receipt and reassured her nothing unusual was happening. The woman continued yelling that she might call the police to report deceptive retail practices. Other customers stared as she finished paying and dramatically folded the receipt like legal evidence. Apparently, the greatest scandal of the day was being asked which receipt she preferred, and that was just the checkout line. If you've witnessed a Karen like this, drop it in the comments, subscribe for more chaos, and I'll see you in the next one.